Well, good morning and welcome to Foreign Policy Research Institute and our panel discussion on doing business in Rwanda. For all of you who were signed up for this discussion that was scheduled for May 30th, we'd like to apologize for the technical difficulties that resulted in a mistaken time being announced, and also that our inability to record the last session. But we welcome you to this and would like to remind you that events like this, while they're free, encourage you to support FPRI, the Africa program, and what we do, and also to encourage your friends to support it. Today's session will be recorded and will be on YouTube within 24 to 48 hours. You can share it with your friends, and anything that you might have missed, you can see it then. Joining us today to talk about doing business in Rwanda will be Professor Carla Jones from Sam Houston State University and Professor Nnamdi Madichie from the University of Kigali. Both are experts in the field, not of the mechanics of doing business, but the cultural, political background that affects how you do business in an area. And this is what we will be looking at, not so much how you go about setting up a business or what forms you have to fill out, but what is the cultural context of doing business in Rwanda? What are the political ramifications? What can a business person from the United States expect when they get off the plane in Kigali to do business in Rwanda? Our two panelists will each speak for about 2 to 3 minutes to introduce themselves and the subject, and then we'll have a very brief discussion, after which time we will open it up to questions from the audience. I encourage you, as we are, please put it in the Q&A box. You will find it at the bottom of your screen, Q&A, so that we don't miss it. I'll be monitoring that. I would ask that you not put your questions in the chat box because they might be missed. At the halfway point, roughly, we will then approach your questions. I'd like to start with Professor Madichie, and then batting cleanup will be Professor Jones. Each, as I said, will speak for 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll have a little moderated discussion on the subject, and then we'll get to your questions. Professor Madichie, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Ambassador Ray. I'm Nnamdi Madichie. I'm based at the University of Kigali here in Rwanda. Right. What do I know about doing business in Rwanda? Right. I've been doing quite a lot of research in terms of the African continent in general and business environments. I also teach a range of subjects on that particular topic across a range of African countries such as Ghana, Rwanda, and some parts of the Middle East in the past. Not forgetting my own base, which is United Kingdom. So it's a great privilege to have the opportunity to share my experiences in terms of doing business in Rwanda, which is usually looked upon by the rest of the continents as a beacon for African development and recognized by the World Bank in its traditional doing business reports. And I think that's about it for now, and I'm looking forward to any further inquiries in that regard.
All right, thank you. Professor Jones.
Okay. Good day, Carla Jones, professor at Sam Houston State University. Keen interest in doing business in Africa, working on some research in that area, kind of looking at Chinese investment on the continent and what China expects in exchange for that investment. As we look at Rwanda today, and look at any country in doing business, one of the things that's important is to examine the governance, the government of the country, and the history of that government. And to assess really the cornerstone of stability and economic growth. So we look at Rwanda. We know that the current political party has been in power since 1994, with President Kagame in power, being the president since 2000, with the ability to remain in power until 2034, if the people say the same. I like that there's a diversity of representation that's included in the Constitution, with women needing to represent at least 30% of the seats in each chamber. And currently they're representing 38% in the Senate and 61% in the lower house seats. That, for me, gives a diversity of voice. Then examining the environment that Kagame has influenced. And in just learning about Rwanda and understanding its leadership, there are a lot of what I consider to be less scripted or unscripted opportunities to hear Kagame's thoughts through talks, classes, interviews, and discussions. To hear his thoughts about Rwanda, as well as all of what's taking place on the continent. We also see the GDP growth of Rwanda over the past years, with the dip due to COVID and the repercussions of COVID. And like Prof. Madichie said, the ease of doing business in Rwanda is noted by the World Bank. They're 38th in the world. So I believe Rwanda has demonstrated resilience and adaptability, moving from subsistence farming to manufacturing and services. So there's a lot of economic process that's taking place. And I'll end there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. One of the things that businesses consider, I mean, in addition to the economic financial variables for doing business in places, a lot of American businesses will be looking at political risk. And one of the issues that comes to my mind when you look at Rwanda is that there have been some tensions between Rwanda and Congo. Rwanda has been accused of supporting the M31 rebels in Congo. It hasn't reached a point of actual violence between the two countries, but talk to me as an American businessman. If I read in the paper that there's this tension between these two countries, how much of a factor is that in terms of my deciding to go to Rwanda to do business? So let's start with you, Professor Madichie.
It's very interesting. I'm originally Nigerian, and my last visit to that country was about 2 years ago. Let me start with that caveat. And there was this spate of kidnappings and everything, and you think the minute you get off the plane, you're going to get kidnapped. So it's not always what you read in papers. That is what's happening on the ground. There are two different scenarios. I, for one, have not felt any of those news coverage in this country. Um, and even the border town, there's a border town of one of the areas called Rubavu or Gisenyi, which borders Democratic Republic of Congo. That's a tourist destination. It's a party town. And people are still flooding there in terms of internal or rather domestic tourism. So the military and the political wranglings and these are still siblings. And needless to add, they are both members of the East African Cooperation, which has been extended to include Somalia as we speak. So yes, we need to really seriously question what we read compared to what's on the ground.
Okay. Well, thank you. Professor Jones, would you like to add to that?
Yes. I agree. There's a complicated reality that exists because there are also several Congolese refugees that live in Rwanda and that are supported by Rwanda and housed. And so it's not the full picture of what's taking place isn't represented in the news. I agree.
Okay. Well, I mean that's always good to know, and that I think is a value of us talking about these issues here, because in the normal business type promotional literature you don't get that sense, which would leave a businessman with a worry, is that what do I believe? But good point. I have another point too. When I served as ambassador to to Zimbabwe, and when I was our deputy chief of mission at the American Embassy in Sierra Leone in the 1990s, one of the issues that I faced in dealing with American companies is that a lot of large American corporations express reluctance to go to Africa because you have 54 countries, there are 54 relatively small markets, and a lot of these corporate CEOs are saying it's not big enough for us to expend the effort on. What do you say in terms of Rwanda to someone who is not too comfortable with the size of the Rwandan market itself? Let's start with you, Professor Jones.
Okay, so with the population of Rwanda being about 14 million, I think that's a great place to start, even for a large company. But I think if that's a small population, then do more of a regional approach. Okay, work perhaps with Rwanda and its neighboring countries, since Rwanda is landlocked. To get to Rwanda, you're going to have to pass through some other countries. So instead of looking country by country, look at a regional area and more so determine how can we approach this area and be successful instead of looking at it as a one-off.
Professor Madichie, you want to add to that?
I must admit, I was just trying to get the population of the East African region, and we're looking at about nearly 500 million in terms of population. And so, that also leads me to agree with Professor Jones in terms of making a regional endeavor, because Rwanda, as far as I'm concerned, is not just a member of the EAC, but also a member of COMESA. We also encompass a very large market such as South Africa. So getting a foothold in Rwanda opens those opportunities. You don't treat a country in isolation, and considering the free movement and everything that regional trading blocks enable in terms of moving across the region. So yeah, I think it'd be foolhardy not to or to disregard Rwanda as a small, minuscule, and uneconomic business case to invest in. Get a foothold and spread. That's what I
Right.
would say.
Oh, well, that's, I understand if I've read correctly that Rwanda is also very much wired into the global electronic economy, which makes you know e-based businesses and services relatively easy. But what about physical commodities? What is the state of the physical infrastructure for transporting hard goods through or from Rwanda to other parts of the continent? In terms of roads, for example, road or air transport. Professor Madichie?
Uh, as you might be aware, Rwanda is a landlocked country with borders with other East African countries, including the likes of Tanzania, Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo. So you can be rest assured that there is that traffic, there's that movement across. I'll just cite one example of beverage. Most of the East African breweries products that are consumed in Rwanda actually come from outside of the country, from Kenya, to be quite honest. We're talking about tobacco and alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. There is a Brariwa local subsidiary of Heineken here, but the other brewers as well that come from across. And apart from that, apart from the formal border crossings and infrastructure that enable cross-border trade formally, there are also informal channels. Let's not forget, it takes us back to the historical development of this country because they've got siblings across. The languages are very common across the border. So that movement, I don't particularly see it as a challenge. I'm not saying it's perfect configuration as it currently stands. It could be improved, and I think there's a recognition of that and realization of they are opening up border posts. They're expanding the border posts across many of these touch points. So that's something that's quite interesting. I see some traction in that direction.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, definitely. I see movement opening. Kagame himself talked about not seeing borders as barriers, but as seeing them as bridges. working with neighboring countries and trying to reduce the cost of moving things across the border. In addition, there's a new airport being built in Kigali, and Qatar Airways is heavily involved in that. So looking at avenues and positioning themselves to be able to move goods in and out of the country. So whatever barriers they are, they're moving in the right direction in order to decrease those challenges of moving product and people in and out of the country.
Right. You mentioned Qatar being involved with building the airport, and as you both probably know, one of the big issues in terms of the U.S. is the Chinese economic presence on the continent, and China is seen basically, I suppose you could say, as the U.S.'s number one competitor for influence in China. What is the presence or impact of China in Rwanda at the moment? Professor Jones, have you done any study on that?
Not Rwanda specifically. However, in seeing how Rwanda is positioning itself to have a choice of who they do business with. So it's not just China or the US, but looking at doing business with the UAE, Turkey, and the Czech Republic to have a choice in who's going to partner for a win-win opportunity, and not being locked into doing business with one country or another. So for me, it looks like perhaps they're setting up a chessboard to say,
Mhm.
okay, who is going to provide the type of relationship and to work with us, allow us, welcome us to the table to provide a win-win and look for opportunity.
Okay. Professor Madichie?
Um, it's good that you asked that question. Let me get closer to China. I think Korea has a more serious influence in this country with the establishment of KOICA, which is one of the investment arms. We have the German Development Corporation, which is popularly known as GIZ. And of course, there's a very huge French influence in this country. I think Rwanda has been very adept in terms of diversifying its portfolios and not particularly locked into any singular country. That's what I see on the ground. I don't know what's out there in terms of reports and policies, but based on my experience and my 3 years of sojourn in this country, I've noticed the interactions and intersections of these different countries and investments in this country, and especially the German Development Corporation and KOICA, which is a Korean investment corporation.
Mhm. One other question in terms of things that impact foreign investors who are coming into a country. And this is something that's a factor wherever you are, to include here in the United States. For the foreign business person coming to Rwanda, how much of a concern is corruption in terms of creating a business plan?
Prof. Madichie, I think
Let
you'd be
me
the
have,
best.
Yeah, your turn.
yeah, let me have a stab at that. Um, from what I know, there's zero tolerance to corruption in this country. And everything, there's some degree of transparency because most of especially when it comes to procurement practices, the country has moved away from manual procurement to e-procurement, where it is transparent in terms of the bidding, tendering, invoicing, and you name it, everything to do with procurement, everything is out there. And of course, the rule of law, as far as I'm concerned, and from what I've heard and seen, is that they have an independent judiciary. So you can rest assured in terms of corruption compared to the rest of African states, as far as I'm concerned, Rwanda is up there.
Okay. Okay, now it's your turn, Professor Jones.
Yeah, I don't have anything. In my exposure to Rwanda, corruption has not been high on the list. That's not one
Okay.
of the major things that people have been worried about. And so I don't have anything to add to that. I would agree with Prof. Madichie.
Hmm. Well, one of the things that I noticed, well, of course, my first trip to Africa was in the 1990s, and even the U.S. wasn't all that into the electronic commerce. But in 2009, when I arrived in Zimbabwe, I was a bit surprised to discover that even in the most remote areas of that country, where people had to have generators in order to have electricity. Almost everyone over the age of 15 had a smartphone and access to the internet. What is the situation in terms of being wired in Rwanda? And I would imagine Rwanda, like the rest of Africa, is overwhelmingly young. What is the status of people's access to the World Wide Web in Rwanda?
So
Professor Jones?
I'll start
Yeah,
with
your
this
turn.
thing.
Your
Yeah,
turn.
go
Okay.
ahead.
So I was there August 2023. I was amazed at the level of interaction with the internet and the basic tasks that could be completed using a smartphone. More so than more things than what I do here in the United States were completed on a smartphone. I think is it right? Is it mobile money, Prof. Madichie? Is it
Sorry, say that
mobile?
again?
Yeah. Is it mobile
Momo,
money?
Momo. Yes,
Yes.
mobile money. Yeah.
Momo. Yes. Just more widespread than like a Google Pay or Apple Pay. But I remember sitting at a restaurant and saying, okay, how do they know we've paid? Like if we get up to walk out, are they gonna chase us? Like it just I was amazed because everyone had at least one device, if not two. Um, and and so even out in remote areas, like you said, what you experienced in Zimbabwe, um, the ability and the dependence on technology is huge as well. There were places. I'm going to say, I don't know the name of the place, but it's in Kigali. It's a large hub for technology. Um,
Nosken House.
Loskin House, just to see the sort of center for entrepreneurs and technology that are drawn there to build and create ideas and innovation for ways to use technology. And the very basic transaction that we might use money for currency can be done over the phone. And that was my introduction. I was very impressed.
Mm. Professor Medici, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I don't want to quote wrong figures. So I'm just on the Ministry of ICT's webpage, Government of Rwanda, which says about at least about 24,000 smartphones available for vulnerable households. And it talks about internet penetration rate of over 50%, mostly in the urban areas. There's always that disparity between urban and rural areas, and that cuts across the entire Africa, broadly defined to include sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. In terms of stats, let's have a quick look. Talking about 3G and 4G, it's talking about 4G internet coverage of about 95% from the official statistics, 9.5 million active subscribers. Don't forget that the population is 14 million, and we're talking about 9.5 million active subscribers. But then again, it needs to be interpreted with caution because Professor Jones pointed out that some individuals have about 3 or 4 smart devices. So there could be double or triple counting. So sometimes when we look at these subscriber rates, you need to be sure who owns what and who are subscribers. So that's something that's quite interesting. I've just come out just to mention one thing. I've just come out of the hospital this afternoon, about 10 minutes before I joined this call. And of course, for consultation, you make the payments, you get your insurance and everything. All payments, everything is electronic. You do it on your smartphone. Your details and everything, every interaction, communication, you name it. You pay your electricity bills, water bills, cable TV subscription. Everything is through the smartphone. So it is very much in place. The only challenge you might have is what happens, or rather, what's happening in the rural areas, which is a conversation for another day, I guess.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned that everything's done on the smartphone, which brings a question into my mind: is what is the status of the phone network? Is it how reliable is the iPhone? I mean, the telephone network.
MTN, the South African MTN, which is subsidiary in Rwanda, which is MTN Rwanda, is clearly the number one. There is Airtel. There are two mobile phone providers when it comes to the traditional telcos. But then again, there are others that manage the data, such as Liquid Telecoms. I remember quite recently there was some kind of internet disruption due to undersea cable something happened somewhere off the shores of was it Somalia or something like that? They affected most parts of Africa. Um, MTN is the dominant force in this country, and of course, those transactions from your bank accounts into your mobile wallets, e-wallets, the cash power, which is energy and everything, is integrated. That is something that I'm looking at. I worry about the level of competition because then again, once they open up the licenses and you get some other players coming into the market, then of course there might be a rush for coverage of the rural areas who are kind of left out of this internet or connectivity ecosystem.
Mhm. Recently I've been working with some security people here in the U.S. There's been a rash of electronic penetrations of bank accounts or hijacking of bank accounts for people who do electronic banking here in the U.S. Uh, and this is something that was actually new to me until I got involved with this. What is the status of cybersecurity in Rwanda in order to protect? I mean, from what you're saying, everyone's economic life is online. What is
Mm.
being done to ensure the security of that?
It's interesting. I had a similar experience when I was in the Middle East, specifically United Arab Emirates, where your phone number is actually linked not just to your passport details, the data page of your passport, but also your visa. So that's something that's quite interesting. So if you lose your phone, you need to report it as stolen. Otherwise, somebody can actually use your details and impersonate you. Your phone number is not like the UK where you get off the plane and you pick up a SIM card. Yeah, most countries in Africa now are beginning to link that phone number because it's your life is on that phone. All your details are there. So it makes it very difficult for somebody to get away with cybercrime when you report your phone stolen. There's this track and trace in terms of the EMEI. In terms of cybersecurity, the country is serious on that. They're engaging in a lot of spaces with partners, investing in tech and cybercrime protection, as the case is. And let's not forget that cybercrime is everywhere. I was just talking about the WannaCry virus that was released in the UK a couple of years ago, where the national health system was hijacked and personal data was thrown out in the open. And it's a global phenomenon. And it takes a global sort of leadership to tackle cybercrime. Uh, by African standards, Rwanda is up there. Trust me.
Professor Jones, you would like to add anything to
No,
that?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Well, we have a very quiet audience today. No one has asked any questions. If there are any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take them. We don't want to talk and not give you a chance to have your questions answered. And so while you're thinking about the questions to ask, I have another one for the panel, and that's the participation of young people in the economic sector. I mean, the one of the issues on the continent that comes up often in discussions is that the bulk of the population is under 25, but the bulk of the decision making is being done by people who are much older, and young people are really being left out of the decision process. What is the participation of young people in business and politics in making decisions in Rwanda?
Hmm. And I can only comment on what I saw on the ground, especially at the I think it's the Noskin House. Am I saying it correctly, Prof?
Yeah,
Yes,
Noskin, yeah.
yes. Um, it was a buzz, a center for technology and innovation, and really solving tomorrow's problems. And the energy from the entrepreneurs that were there that really wanted, seemingly wanted to, um, be on the leading edge of solving problems, not only in technology, but across basic needs and for Rwanda and then for a larger scale. Um, I'm not sure about the involvement in politics. I've heard many times the recognition of the large percentage, maybe 25% of folks under 40 will be, or that middle population will come from the continent. And so I think there's an acknowledgement and understanding. Now it's getting them involved and targeting what they need in order to move forward into the future.
Professor Madichie?
I couldn't agree more. I was just you see that there is a connection. I would like to expand that age category, taking it up to 40, rather than cutting it out at 25. Because I tend to look at life begins at 40, they say. Unfortunately, I missed that part of my growing up. Right. The bottom line is this. In terms of representation, yes, the voices of the youth are quite obvious. And when you talk about Noskin House, for instance, you're talking about tech. Youth, you cannot detach youth from tech or tech from youth. So, but that is where the problem lies. Now, I think the main challenge now is getting the youth involved in sectors that actually matter. And if you ask me, any part of Africa, the agricultural sector cannot be neglected. Bring tech into agri to come across something called agri-tech and bringing innovative solutions to to uh to agriculture, which is the main source of livelihood for most of the population. That's where the problem lies. I also came across a very interesting documentary, three-part series by France 24, in terms of how the creative industries and how an artist actually did a documentary on rural Rwanda, trying to encourage youth to embrace the rural areas. And of course, to make people realize that there is more to life than the urban centers. And like we said, Professor Jones mentioned the Bugesera International Airport that's currently under construction. Life is getting bigger than Kigali. People don't realize there's more to Rwanda than just Kigali. So that's something else. We need to look at some of the other provinces, about 4 or 5 orders. Well, if you consider Kigali as one province, there are 4 orders: the northern, southern, eastern, and western provinces. And most of the ecotourism are outside of Kigali as it is. So this is something that's quite interesting. Getting the youth have a taster and have an appetite for investing in what can be considered an old people's trade, which is agriculture, because you can bring tech into agri to develop the agribusiness sector in this country.
Yes. There is a business I learned of, sort of like, I agree with you, Prof, getting the youth involved in and tech involved in other industries, a business that sort of like Uber for farm equipment, where you can request, different farm equipment instead of owning it to be used at your property. And I thought that that was really innovative because, okay, instead of having to invest in this large machine, I can just request use of the machine using the phone and then use it and then have it go back. And so that might be a cheaper way of continuing to be invested in agriculture and bringing tech to agriculture. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were
no,
going to say
no.
something.
Well, as we just had the visit from the president of Kenya to the U.S., I thought maybe if we talked about, what's taking place in other areas on the continent that might spill over and influence Rwanda. And so you and I, Ambassador Ray, had talked about, how Rwanda might consider, is there a disadvantage that they're not the spotlight isn't shining on Rwanda, and with the spotlight shining on the U.S.-Kenyan relationship. And so I just thought, since we don't have questions that are in the Q&A, that perhaps we start to discuss how other relationships might impact Rwanda's success.
No, I think no, you're right, absolutely, and that does bring up a question, and that is, and I'd like to start with Professor Madichie on this, and then come back to you, and that is, how is Rwanda leveraging this new celebrity that Kenya has in terms of its special relationship with the U.S. Is Rwanda positioning itself to take advantage of that, Professor Madichie?
It's that's only natural. There's going to be spillover effects. You cannot disconnect Kenya completely from Rwanda. And let me just mention one particular sector that people have often taken for granted. And interestingly, the former CEO of the Rwanda Development Board, which is one of the key tools of the government to protect big investments for the country, Claire Akamanzi, Her Excellency, became the CEO of the Basketball Africa League. The Basketball Africa League, in its fourth iteration, fourth in the series, just concluded in Kigali here. So that's something that's quite interesting, featuring a range of countries from across the continent, and of course, players from different nationalities. So one thing about Rwanda is that it remains a MICE destination. By MICE, I mean meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. You name it, is hosted in Kigali, including including the deliberations over the kickstarting of the African Continental Free Trade Area after in 2018. The meeting was held here in Rwanda. So now Rwanda is giving places or destinations such as Cape Town a run for their money as events destinations. Kenya doesn't even come close to that. I'm afraid probably I'm not being politically correct in that respect. But Rwanda is punching above its weight in terms of attracting such events. Now the question now is, what happens afterwards, and how does it trickle? So there was a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in 2022, which I was fortunate enough to be here in Rwanda to witness myself. It was major. There are numerous side events. I attended quite a few of those, and you can begin to see how the networks and business negotiations and dealings were beginning to evolve. And let's not even forget that there are so many startup opportunities, such as office rentals, for those not willing, or rather testing the waters before they actually set up shop here. You can rent an office for 2 weeks, continue your deal, move away, and reconsider whether you want to come back or not. So there are quite a lot of things that are going on here, which is quite interesting. That's where the youth come in as well. Let me pause before I get ahead of myself.
So I looked at the Nairobi, Washington vision that was published, and it seems to not just focus on Kenya and the US, but to recognize, that there are other countries that need to be involved on both sides. So there are other partnerships that need to be developed, and that this might be an example. But from what I've heard from the different times that I've heard Kagame speak, that he subscribes to the rising tide lifts all boats. And so with the focus on Kenya, that Rwanda can benefit from that also. So while Kenya gets the attention, Rwanda isn't disadvantaged, but the lights can also shine on Rwanda. Just to be able to make a decision, to be at the table, and to find a win-win for all parties involved. And so I hope that we'll see how this partnership, how this relationship develops between Nairobi and Washington, and the spillover, and the open the door and the invitation for other countries to participate also. So I think it's a good opportunity. I hope that it is leveraged and used wisely.
Okay. Uh, that's extremely interesting, particularly, I think, given the current situation in South Africa, which is, I guess, a polite way to describe that would be uncertainty.
Yes.
as we wait to see how South Africa sorts itself out governmentally after the elections. But the question comes up, I mean, Rwanda is not that far from South Africa either. And if South Africa experiences too much turmoil, I can't see it not impacting Rwanda. Professor Madichie, what are you hearing there on the ground or
Um,
feeling in terms of what's happening in South Africa? Is it reverberating in Rwanda at all?
no, I'm not speaking on behalf of Rwanda. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, being situated in Rwanda. I think I'm just looking at the neighboring countries of Rwanda, Uganda, DRC, Tanzania, and Burundi. Uh, those seem to be of more priority than what's happening in South Africa. Whatever happens in South Africa impacts not just countries that are close to South Africa, even as far as Nigeria and Ghana.
Mhm.
So it's not the first time some of these things have been anticipated in the past. They have been worse. They have been worse in Kenya over the one of the elections that went wrong at some point. And impacts didn't really spread across the EAC. So I think there's a very strong message. The lessons for South Africa will probably be more with the SADC nations rather than anything beyond that as an immediate sort of impact. But then again, who am I? Those are just my thoughts.
Mhm.
Professor
I
Jones, you
concur
have any
with,
feelings on
yeah,
that?
what you've said. The immediate impact of the regional countries, but of course, what happens in South Africa is going to have an impact. Um, I don't know. South Africa's been in the political scene has been in flux, let me say, for some time. I was hoping it would go more in a positive direction than where it is post with these elections. It's uncertain. However, I see, Kagame more focusing on the regional area of South Africa needs more time to work itself out and figure out how to move forward. But it's such a large area and has such a history of working with other countries and trade and economic growth. So I hope it doesn't take such a long time for it to work itself out. But with the high, the tide lifting all boats, if Rwanda needs to run ahead and not focus, try to focus on its own regional area in the own country and tied to Kenya, I definitely see it doing that. And South Africa will have to fix itself.
Good point. Well, we finally have some response from our audience. We have one question here. This is for Professor Madichie. I'd like to hear Professor Madichie's comments on Rwanda's demographic change or addition, especially young Africans. Last week, the Ministry of Education reported over 10,000 international students, mostly from Africa. Today at ALU graduation, President Kagame said Rwanda wants more foreign students. It's also willing to welcome and integrate immigrants, be it from Libya, UK, and other migrants. How does this change affect business in Rwanda? Let's start with you, Professor Medici, and then we'll come back to you, Professor Jones.
It's interesting. The graduation has been trending. It happened today. African Leadership University. So it has an outpost in Mauritius and another one in Kigali here in Rwanda. It is interesting because the name of the university raises quite a lot of uh, it draws our mind to the role of the so-called ivory towers in terms of socio-economic development and, of course, development of future leaders. And of course, by opening up and making it's very interesting because something that's going very wrong right now in the UK is a clampdown of international students. So maybe who knows, destination Rwanda will be the next one. And what it does is that it gives a multicultural sort of flavor to the level of education, the interactions, intersections, and possibly business opportunities as a result of this. So yes, I do agree with that. And some of the reasons I've mentioned that is that Rwanda is open for business. And that's one thing that countries such as the United Kingdom need to begin to listen and listen carefully to.
Okay. Professor Jones?
I think it's brilliant to invite students from other countries because with in seeking education, going to another country, the opportunity to perhaps stay once your degree is completed provides others with exposure to the country. It's almost a PR campaign for Rwanda. Hey, come to Rwanda, visit, get your education, report back what's taking place in Rwanda. And it's also the opportunity to leverage diversity. Okay, so we're not just looking at what's happening here, but we're bringing in other minds, other experiences to solve some of the problems in Rwanda. And it's sort of a strategic avenue to gain more exposure for Rwanda and to bring people in. Now, what the immigration policies are for allowing students to stay, that'll determine the benefit of bringing students in from outside of the country.
Okay. Okay, another question here. Can you speak to the unique opportunities for growth and leadership the rural parts of Rwanda have displayed? Thinking about the use of drones to deliver medical supplies and blood to the most remote parts of the country. Uh, who wants to take that one? Let's start with you, Professor Jones, and then we'll go to Professor Madichie.
Okay. I'm not sure that I have anything to add on to that one. So I pass it to Prof. Madichie.
Fair enough, Professor Madichie.
All right, let me see if I can see the question. Is it on the charts? Where
In
did
the
you get that
Q&A.
It's
question
in
from?
the Q&A. I'll read it to you again. Can you speak
Right,
to
let's
the
have a look.
unique opportunities for growth and leadership the rural parts of Rwanda have displayed? And so thinking about the use of drones to deliver medical supplies and blood to the most remote parts of the country.
There's this company called Zipline, and I was fortunate enough to be at their stand at the Commonwealth Business Forum in 2022, and I met His Excellency there as well, recognizing the role of Zipline. So that is the only company we know that actually does that in Rwanda. Whether that's an avenue for other companies coming to, depends. Then again, there is also the need for regulation of, you need to be very careful about airspaces when you're flying drones. We've had issues around Heathrow at some point, so these are very interesting conversations. Yes, sitting down, having a conversation with Zipline and regarding what the market should be like, what sort of regulations will be required, and who else can come onto the scene will make a great deal of sense. But yes, the rural areas need to be reached. Don't forget that Rwanda is a land of 1,000 hills. So there are places that are not usually readily reachable. So it comes in quite handy.
Hmm.
Yeah. I like what you said before, Prof. Just Kigali is such the center of conversation when we talk about Rwanda. Um, and and the focus of where the energy is, but there are other places and other places need to be reached, and the urbanization is not going to be complete. So I like the idea of expanding our view and our interest beyond Kigali.
I'd like to ask a question to sort of take this bit of the drone usage further. And I think it's interesting that you talk about, the need to talk about not just the machines themselves, but managing airspace and the control and the security issues. But the question comes to mind, is there a domestic drone manufacturing capability in Rwanda, or must they be imported from outside?
Ambassador Ray, to be quite honest, I've not done my homework on Zipline. I'll do a quick check because that's all we know. That's all I know that operates in this country and has been quite effective. You know what? You know what makes them even more effective? Because they were actually in business when they were needed most during the lockdowns and COVID.
Hmm.
So that was mega. So now, whether they're a domestic company or an assembling plant or whatever, I'm not too sure. But I'll do my
Mhm.
research and get back to you on that.
Yeah. So what I see is it just operates distribution centers in other places.
Hmm.
Um,
Mm.
but from the verbiage that I've read, uh, Rwanda seems to be big on don't just drop off things in Rwanda. What can we create in Rwanda and develop that can be used here? So
Mm, mm.
interesting.
So perhaps we've mentioned a potential new business opportunity for some enterprising entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point.
Rwanda wants to participate in more parts of the value chain.
Well, one other question that I'd like to ask, and then we're coming close to closing, um, and that's climate change, agriculture, developing the agricultural sector so that it's sustainable and provides good living, at the same time protecting the environment so that it provides that good living for the future generations. What's Rwanda doing in that regard?
That's good. Prof. Madichie, are you aware?
Right. Okay. Ambassador Ray, can you kindly rephrase that so that I will have uh, I'll buy some time to process.
Okay, sure. Uh, you mentioned the need to revitalize the agricultural industry because so many people depend
Mm,
on it, and that's a good point. I mean, food
mm,
security and the bulk of the
mm,
population is in the rural areas.
mm.
You talked about this sort of electronic or internet type uh, technology in
Mm.
farming. My question
Right.
though is, because I know that the entire continent is being severely impacted by climate change, much more so than other inhabited continents. And there is a need, while building the agricultural industry, to also build it in a sustainable way that it goes into the future and doesn't destroy the environment. And I guess my question
Mm,
is, what is Rwanda doing to build the agricultural sector, but in a sustainable, climate-friendly way?
mm. Uh, All right. Okay. So that's interesting. That's why I think it might make sense to see if I can share my screen. Uh,
Yeah, if you could make Professor Madichie a co-host so he can.
yeah, yeah. I can see. I can see something. Uh, can you see my screen?
Yes, we
Hmm.
can. A lot of stuff on your screen.
Oh yeah. I'm a very busy man. Uh, now let's start from here. Now this is an institution, a very powerful institution. You might want to make a note of it. It's called the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. Now, this is not you don't just get in and get in there. So what they're trained is everything related to conservation agriculture. It's a very powerful institution with key international partners. And what it does is cover everything agriculture with conservation. So if what's on the screen, it tells you we are fueling a movement in agriculture. In Rwanda, agricultural challenges are real. RICA, Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, aims to equip students with the knowledge and skills to create cutting-edge solutions. For successful entrepreneurs and job creators, they are about to impact lives. So, which also resonates with something I read recently in one of the think tanks called Further Africa, talking about some of the key priority sectors, including renewable energy technologies, solar, wind, hydropower, sustainable agricultural practices such as agroforestry, precision farming, vertical farming, and you name it. And not to add, or rather, not to mention, I've just concluded a research in climate adaptation and mitigation that was actually funded by the German Development Corporation in consultation with the Private Sector Federation of Rwanda. So that lots of these entities understand where the gaps are, and they are picking on consultants to share insights and inputs into that soul space. And finally, one of the two entrepreneurs I initially suggested to be part of this conversation is somebody that I know that was affected firsthand, where his coffee plantation was washed in floods. 2 days rain and your farmland is gone. So you can imagine some of those things. We know that climate change is real and there is need for disaster management practices, especially when it comes to farmlands. So climate adaptation and climate mitigation, these are all avenues for foreign investments. How do we deal with that, and how do we align that with what the likes of RICA and many other entities are doing? I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah.
I think it does actually, and quite well. This is something new to me, but it's good to see that Rwanda is looking at the concept of climate-friendly agriculture as opposed to just expanding the sector, but expanding it in a sustainable way that accords with preserving the environment. And with that, we are coming up on the close, and want to thank our two panelists for being with us, and thank all of you for joining us. Remind you that the recording of this event will be on our YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. Encourage you to share it widely. And again, to encourage all of you, if you're not members of FPRI, consider becoming one, or supporting our programs, and especially our Africa program, one of the smallest and newest, but we like to think most active and forward-leaning programs in FPRI. And with that, we say farewell. We will see you again next time, and thank you for joining us.